All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for doing this interview, and also thanks for what you do in general. You know, I try to do this every time I run into somebody that is helping feed us. That I think we don't thank those folks enough. And I know that you've been involved in this stuff for many, many years, and I've kind of been aware of you for several years now. You know, I know you've been in a lot of the research, and there's a lot of literature out there in the I guess the maybe range science field. I'm a medical doctor. I mean, I have no business knowing anything about range science, but I mean, just because I've been a proponent of meat now for several years, I had to sort of leave that. And your name came up many, many times in the discussion. So it's nice to see. You were recently featured in the movie Sacred Cow, which I was fortunate to watch an advanced copy of. So it's cool to see that message is getting out. And so if you don't mind, could you give us a little bit of background on you?
Yeah, man. Well, see, dude, I was stalking you online, and I saw you were UT and graduated, what, 91? 92?
89.
89. Well, I graduated from A&M.
Oh, man, sorry.
So are you from Texas, or where are you from?
I moved there, in high school. So I spent a lot of time there, and I went, undergrad, high school.
Where'd y'all move to?
Town called Lake Jackson, which is
now south of Houston.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I went to high school.
I grew up duck hunting in the Matagorda Bay area.
Okay,
all through Wharton, all that.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Texas. Dad's a cosmetic dentist north of Houston, and just retired. And so I grew up like really very active in FFA. I mean, you probably Houston Livestock Show, Fort Worth. All the stuff. We showed a lot of lambs and cattle and hogs. We had a really robust FFA program, and so I really got involved with agriculture kind of more through the show industry, right? Which is really kind of predicated on form and function and looks, and maybe not as much hardcore red meat, things like that. And so I went to A&M, coached livestock judging teams, and really did that kind of a deal. And all the way through a long series, I got my PhD here at Michigan State, and then had the opportunity to go to LSU. So I was in Baton Rouge on faculty there, and basically doing nothing different, man. Wendell Berry, I don't know if you've ever read any Wendell stuff. He says all land grant institutions are like an airport. Once you've been to one, you've been to all of them. And so we were kind of, I was just doing regular grazing research, right? And doing what the neighbors were doing, trying to take what I learned at Michigan State, doing it in Baton Rouge. Instead of Herefords and Angus, we had Brayfords and Brangus with Brahman influence. And then, boom, Hurricane Katrina and Rita hit in fall of 2005. And that completely changed the way I thought about food production. Because I was kind of programmed to say, hey, we've got this really resilient, big food system. We feed the world. We do all these great things. And once I saw those storms blow through, I was like, man, I'm looking for food. Hey, there's cereal grains out there. There's, oranges out there, but everything kind of, I just started thinking of things as feedstocks to go into a pretty big food system that I still think we need. But the point is, I got really interested in resilience. And how do we make our food systems more resilient? And that got me into thinking about not trying to pit a big food system versus a small, or organic versus non. I don't get into that deal. But more importantly, what is the best way to have a resilient food system? And so I've been doing that work, really interested in pasture-based stuff, grass-fed stuff, do a lot of greenhouse gas emissions work. Came to MSU in 2009. And MSU has been a great place to work. They said, here's this experiment station, Lake City, Michigan, 45th parallel south of Traverse City, maybe 45 minutes. And I've been really investigating, how can we make a more resilient food system? So I spend a majority of my time measuring greenhouse gases, looking at how different types of ag influences, fluxes, soil carbon. But my side gig's kind of beef nutritive value. That's kind of my happy place. I run 500 red Angus cows across 2 experiment stations in Michigan. But we're also playing now. I say playing. We brought in some Akaushi genetics, which are the outcome. Basically, they're based off the Korean Hanu, which is the draft animal. That is like the beef of Korea. We've also recently been working with some folks that have some Wagyus on board. So I kind of been, looking also at the impacts of breed and grass finishing, grain finishing, all on nutritive value.
Yeah, I glanced at a paper, somebody sent me a series of papers you've done recently. And one of them was looking at the differences in different finishing style, because we have this sort of, this is grass finish, this is grain finish, and they're all uniformly the same. But even, they're very different depending on the breed. I mean, you can tell us more than that. The breeding, the age, the location, what they're finished on. So grass finish, it doesn't just mean one thing. So can you talk a little bit how much difference there is within even the grass finished sort of definition?
So let's just say and I may, I don't want to tick any of y'all's listeners off or whatever, but generally speaking, I think that it's really tough to make these huge, broad claims that grass-fed is healthier than grain-fed, or it really can be. It really needs to be nuanced, and there's a lot of nuance in how we produce food. It can be the same thing as the same thing is nutrient dense wheat. Wine, whatever. So grass finishing means that the animal effectively is consuming forage for 100, their entire life. Now there are some broadness to that, because USDA doesn't have a grass-fed claim anymore, which comes through the Agriculture Marketing Service. And so what happens then is, like on a big beef basis, is that companies they do what's called a process verified plan, and they submit how they produce beef to this USDA entity, and they can say, hey, this is grass-fed or not based on these conditions. So grass-fed doesn't necessarily mean bucolic pastures and butterflies, and it can be that there is some level where animals maybe have 10 acres to go out on, but they're fed baleage and hay. They could be fed an alfalfa pellet. They do need to have access, but there's a lot of variation, right? So there are certain grass-fed claims that say, hey, because of drought, you may be able to supplement a fiber-based ration or supplement to get you through a bad spell. So that could even potentially be like a soy hull pellet, which is the hull of the soy. And so so to answer your question is, it depends. My view on grass-fed typically is from birth to slaughter, they're fed grass, and so I tend to think about it pretty simplistically. But the key then is that I recommend to folks, I'm like, well, know how, if you're really into exactly how something's produced, then do a little homework. What's the guy? Frank. You had Frank on a few weeks, right? Down from Los Angeles.
No, yeah, Frank Fitzpatrick. He's actually in Orange County.
Guy, right?
Yeah.
So
he's a good guy.
Know Frank, call him up, say, hey, what do you do? Or if you're going to buy a certain beef online or whatever, just investigate how they do it. And there can be a broad variation then on how those animals are finished based on what the nutritive value is in the meat.
Yeah, and so this is the one thing, and I see, there's definitely, I think, an environmental argument to be made on how we pasture animals. I think that's pretty clear, and I think you helped demonstrate that with water sequestration and improvement in soil. I think that's definitely there. But when we start, there's people making the health claims, and I look through the literature to see what's been done in humans to say, these humans ate grass-finished beef, these humans ate grain-finished beef, and wow, look at the huge differences. I just can't find the literature to support that. In fact, Texas A&M did a study, I think it was about, 8 years ago, where they looked at ground beef, grass finished versus grain finished, and the outcome was not really different in my view. So I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to find out when people make these claims about your health is, there's people out there says, if you eat grain finished meat, you're eating equivalent of poison, and it's awful for you and not good for your health. And I just can't find anything that supports that. Are you aware of anything like that?
Yeah. It's really hard. I'm not. I mean, I think that probably the person that can best talk about these things is Dr. Fred Provenza, and the kind of Provenzanian logic, right? Where it's all based on biodiversity. and phytochemical richness in diet that's probably the real drivers in how we respond to food. We obviously, all this, man, like the Inuits and all these other cultures that have evolved for a very long time, eating high amounts of fat are superbly healthy. And so what I think, my take on it, right, is that, typically, honestly, grass-fed typically tends to have higher saturated fat than grain-fed. Grain-fed typically has higher monounsaturated fat. Based on the types of ways we finish, we can alter fatty acid profiles in the meat, whether it's grain or grass. We play around feeding grapeseed extract, which is high in certain phytochemicals, and we're looking at it in a grain-fed ration. So to say, hey, can you add this really potentially biodiverse or nutrient-rich supplement to a grain ration for the last 60 days and see a response in the meat? You can have a monoculture of alfalfa in a grass-fed diet. And so effectively then I think it's more about what goes into the animals. And, I would say then that, like, what I do, so to me, the data is really hard to find, like, these very line in the sand outcomes that grass is better than grain or grain is better than grass. So what I will say, though, is that really, I think this is more of just kind of a common sense deal, that if we continually grow plants, whether it's on grass or grain, on soils that are being depleted and being eroded and constantly over decades being stripped of nutrients, including micronutrients and phytonutrients, we can only then, just basically summarize that over time, we're going to probably see less nutrients in those grains or in those grasses. And that, to me, is probably the more important driver. So not pitting grass versus grain or what's healthier, but more aptly understanding what is going into the animals. So I think then it really all becomes a lot more of a more difficult discussion, right? And so we prefer, like for me, Epic Grass-fed, right, is super biodiverse pasture that has forbs, that has, legumes, that has warm season grasses, cool season grasses if your environment allows. And that animal's getting this wonderfully diverse, diet. But I think concurrently we have to be realistic and look at the land requirements in the U.S. and say, hey, that can't happen everywhere. And so we look, I don't want to get shot by all my regenerative friends, but we eat CAB here at the Rowntree house just the same, right? Certified Angus, and so that's, I hope I'm not talking in circles. I'll hush, let you ask something else.
No, I mean, I think it's a great perspective. I think it's fair that we have to do this and look at what's practical. I've interviewed Fred and asked him specifically, and he basically, what he could come up with was a study in Australia looking at beef versus kangaroo.
Yeah, great study.
And that was, I was like, well, that's really not a fair comparison. I mean, you kind of, they're different animals, and so we got to get at least the same species, the same animal when we make this comparison. So
no, you're right, bro. Yeah.
And this is what I see is, I have now seen tens of thousands of people go on a meat-based diet where they eat just a shit ton of meat. I mean, they're just eating meat all day long. And guess what? They're all getting healthy, which is, first of all, the shocking thing. Most people are surprised, but maybe not you or I. But the thing is, I've yet to see a big distinction between, people that eat grass finished versus grain finished in the overall group. Now, there's people that'll say, I feel better eating this or that. And certainly I don't discount that. But when I look at the overall population of people, it's hard to really to single out, that this is clearly better. Now, I always point to the fact that what you guys are doing, and part of the movie you're in that Diana Rogers and others produced, to say, look, we can, do we have a sustainable system? And you talk about the soil. And I think that is a huge reason to sort of support that. And I've had, I've had Glenn Elzinga and Alan Savory.
Oh, yeah, great folks.
I mean, so many people. I got Gabe Brown coming on. I've got, Frank Fitzpatrick and, on and on and on.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, White Oaks pasture. Who's the White Oaks pasture? Will Harris. Yeah, Will. And I mean, I've just all these guys, and we try to get the message out there. And I think it's great that more and more people are doing that. And I think because when we talk about what are we going to eat in 20 years, and there's certainly a push that we're going to be eating some sort of concoction of monocrop derived proteins, you know, and that's just destroying the land more. And I think this is something we have to take on. And I know I've talked to, you know, also guys like Frank Mintlauner and Sarah Place, you know, the work, you know, kind of NCBA and, you know, UC Davis. And, you know, the thought is, you know, there can be a hybrid system, you know, it isn't all or nothing. And I think I think people forget that even grass finished animals, I mean, they can devastate the land if they're not managed properly. I mean, they just chew it down to nothing. I think that's important to understand.
Yep. No, you're right. And so it's like I've worked in Africa, right? And you see huge challenges with overgrazing because of societal differences. And you know, all the folks that you've talked about, the key that we have to understand is like 40% of Earth's land, terrestrial land, is not suitable for a plow. And so, hold on, I gotta let the golden out. There we go. She starts howling, and it just creates a ruckus. So, the aspects then. So really, this all goes back to a lot of human management, and what are the best ways that we can long term grow food, right? And so we've got to be we've got to be thinking perennials where perennials are appropriate. And that's going to be in a lot of these unarable landscape or untillable landscapes, like we talked, right? So that though all the landscapes have pretty much evolved with ruminants and grasses, right? And it's a logical gig. I mean, we can't beat photosynthesis. You can't beat photosynthesis in a lab. You can't do it. You just simply can't overcome the energy. I've done the math. And anybody that says that they can beat photosynthesis in a lab, I think is really probably trying to sell you something personally. But at that point, honestly, Shawn, you know, we get in these arguments about impossible versus, you know, regular beef and all that, you know, and the only thing I don't like about all of it is suddenly like this poor soybean farmer gets thrown under the bus or something, you know, some dude that's trying to feed his family and is kind of locked into a paradigm that wasn't that person's choosing, but unfortunately that's where they are. And I think we just always need to think about how we grow food. And that's the real driver.
Yeah, let's speak, because and obviously as someone who eats a lot of meat, I find it's appropriate for me to care how the animals are raised and how the meat's produced. But I think, you know, I don't expect the whole world to go on a carnivore diet. I mean, I don't think any of us think that's going to be a practicality or even a desirability. But we don't often talk about, at least in this circle, how can we improve that soybean farmer so he is not contributing to soil degradation. Is there a lot of room for improvement in that field? I mean, can you combine animals and plants, and how would that work to improve plant agriculture? Yeah.
So you know, that is like the elephant in the room, and really, we know in our existing cropping systems that over half of the soil's been lost. It's ended up in places it shouldn't be. It's blown around. It's in the Gulf of Mexico. And so what we need to do is kind of think about this concept of, you know, we know that perennials work, right? But in our cropping systems, it's more about keeping green things growing or perennialization, such that you're using, you know, cover crops. We're using diversity in smaller windows that can create greater soil health. And those aspects are going to therefore build soil, but allow us still to continue to grow grains. We need grains. I mean, I don't think you throw them out and say, hey, we're going to have all perennials everywhere. And so, you know, these aspects then, you know, there's certain like soil health principles that are important, right? And keeping your ground covered all the time is one of them. Emphasizing biodiversity, huge. No-till, huge. Thanks. These others are that are out there. And so instead of, you know, saying, oh my God, monocultures are going to kill the world, that's an output. A monoculture crop's an output. What we need to focus on is how we got there. And so we're not going to throw a bean or a kernel of corn out or a kernel of wheat out. We're not going to throw a gallon of oil out or a barrel of oil but more importantly, it's like, what are the decisions we make and how we produce those things? and how are they being used? And I think that's the more intrinsic discussion, such that, we can do a lot better things to grow a crop. The data is aware. There's people like Understanding Ag I've had the honor to work with that are, just kind of coming at it from a regenerative ag, soil health approach that, within a year and a half, these folks are up to like 17 million acres. General Mills is invested a ton of money in improving regeneration in their oats, and are working in their dairy models. And so what we want to do is like, oh my God, these things are bad and we need to stop it. And that's just not a realistic answer. So what we need to do then is take that lower hanging fruit, find how we can dramatically improve the way we grow crops and focus on that, because each of us can do that. And I think there's so much low hanging fruit we can really improve in a hurry.
Yeah, and that's good to hear. I think that's fair. Let's talk a little bit. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about greenhouse gases, because you said you spend a lot of time talking about that. So
yeah,
we've got this livestock long shadow 2006 study coming out. It's that cows are the worst thing on the planet.
right.
There's a lot of sort of pushback on that, saying, "Hey, man, the methane cycle is different with cows." Can you give us an overview of what we know in 2020 relative to what we knew or what we thought we knew in 26 with regard to greenhouse gas and stuff like that?
Right. So basically so effectively a lot of the way that we come out with, enteric methane, right, is it's basically, let me see, I've actually, like, is it cool to share screen or no?
Yeah, absolutely. You can share your screen.
Okay, let me find, I should have had it up. Applied animal science. I'll find it here in a minute. So I think this might be it. Oh shit, no, that ain't it. I'll just talk. I don't want to bore you guys.
That's fine. No, that's fine.
So hey, a cow eats grass. All right. That grass goes into the rumen that has this plethora of microbes that's in the gut. It's this massive fermentation vat, right? And so that grass is like being broken down by enzymes, by microbes, by all this stuff. And effectively what happens then is that there are these free hydrogens that are produced in there, and they're effectively bound to carbon, and a CH4 molecule comes out. That's called a ructation. It's 98% through the front end and 2% out the back end. Okay. So methane has been happening for a very long time. I mean, so, let's go back 150 million years to it's been going on for a very long time. Okay. So, what happens then is that methane molecule is in the atmosphere. It typically has a half-life of 10 to 12 years. And then it's broken down into carbon dioxide and water by OH radicals. And so effectively then you've got a long-term event of CO2, CH4 coming up and out, and a little bit comes out of the soil too. So that CH4 comes out, it's broken down into carbon dioxide and water in a 10-year, somewhere in there, 12 years. And then that provides CO2 for photosynthesis, and it provides water to grow more grass. Okay, that's been happening for a really long time. So what's happening now, it's important to understand that even though it is here for a shorter period of time, it does have a higher global warming potential, which it means it can trap more greenhouse gases than one molecule of carbon dioxide, roughly about a 32 based on which way you look at it. So what we do though is we use the International Panel of Climate Change formulas to which are kind of a global way of assessing methane emissions, right? And so effectively we put methane with the same half-life as we look at it on a 100-year basis, but we know methane's only here for 10 years. So see, there's some little bit of give and take on understanding the real, global warming impact of enteric methane. But the bigger picture is that we know it's part of a natural biogenic cycle. What happens, and I don't want to throw any other industry, I don't want to be critical, But we get considerably greater methane from oil and natural gas industries, from making fertilizers and other things. You typically look at methane, and one of the primary ways it enters the atmosphere is through flaring of natural gas and oil systems, okay? So we've actually kind of started to get this out of whack deal with methane in the atmosphere. But, and I don't want to talk too much, but what's happening today is that when we sign on to the Paris Accords, like countries said, hey, we're going to lower emissions by 30% or 50% or whatever that number is, it's all industries. So I was in New Zealand this spring. I don't know why in the hell I came back, honestly, but I didn't know. Never mind. That's a bad joke. I didn't know what I was coming back to, but I was working in New Zealand this spring, and really a pastorally based agriculture system, right? But guess what? They signed the Paris Accords. Okay. Their primary agriculture is pasture based, dairy, beef, small ruminants. Oh, well, hey, dairy, how are you going to lower your emissions by 30%? Well, guess what? 70 to 80% of the overall emissions enteric methane. So now, even though it's part of a natural biogenic cycle, it is now underneath the bus of the Paris Accords, and it's getting its ass ran right over. So what's happening then is we're putting these undue regulations on ranchers when we should be more aptly focusing on how to address the emissions coming from certain industries that are more of the problem.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to live in New Zealand for 2 years. I played rugby down there back, almost 30 years ago. Beautiful place, and obviously sheep all over the place, and it's just beautiful grain. I mean green fields.
Oh yeah.
I mean they've got like a ideal climate for raising ruminants. It seems.
They do.
I mean, so this is a thing that you have countries like New Zealand that don't put out a lot of greenhouse gases compared to places like China, the US, and some of these other countries that have these massive energy and industrial sectors. And you would expect, if we were to go back 100 years, the majority of the greenhouse gases would have been coming from animals, right? It's the oil and gas industry and commercial industry and transportation only developed over the last 100 years or so. And so it's kind of like because I've talked to Frank Mitloner about this stuff, and it's like, the majority of the places where they have high levels of greenhouse gas emissions is because they don't have anything else. It's just like these third world countries. Yeah. It's kind of same. It doesn't seem to make sense to hold those to the same standard as a country like the United States or China or one of these other countries that puts out a lot of stuff.
No, that's right. And I did the math when I did some of those talks in New Zealand. And so the U.S. emission, like agriculture in the U.S. is it's around 9% of the country's emission. US EPA, Obama US EPA data. Okay. And of that, 60% is animals. So we're at 5.5. And of that, 60% is enteric. So, enteric methane is 2 to 3% of the entire United States footprint. And, but all of a sudden, like, cow is enemy number one. And it's just silly, man. And then if you look at New Zealand, to your point, I did the math. And like New Zealand's, their entire country's footprint is like, it doesn't even show up as a blip on the map in the US. And it just seems, a little silly to me.
Yeah. And I think you end up with, human suffering at the end of the day, in my view. We look at the countries, well, you were in Africa and, there's just high rates of stunning. And, if you just put a chicken in their life, a little bit of egg and dairy, it dramatically improves their health and cognitive outcomes. It's just amazing.
Oh man. And it's the only place I've ever seen thin people that are diabetic. And the problem, it's like you have, the corn mash is that kind of corn substance is the base of most of the food. But but people are walking miles and miles and miles a day with very little meat in their diet. And therefore, they, as you indicated, micronutrients, fatty acids, other things, and they're walking diabetic and they're very thin. It's a really odd combination. I've never seen anywhere else.
You kind of alluded to the Beyond Meat Impossible Burger stuff. And then of course we've got this cell culture meat looming that will, certainly happen, and it'll be a choice. Are you concerned that the animal agriculture business will be put out of business by 2030, 2040, as some are predicting? Is that something that's going to actually go away, or do you think there's no way that's going to happen?
Well, no, I may be getting to the point where I'm of the age where I'm getting a little more old fashioned, but I just can't see it. I mean, I honestly think a lot of it is it's a, you know, there's a lot of money coming into this deal, and hey man, I'm all for capitalism. Okay, I'm all for a fair capitalistic system, not a corporatist system. But and so I think a lot of this, in my opinion, is trying to encourage greater investment by making quasi outlandish claims that we're going to put this entire industry to bed within the next 20 years. And because of that, you're going to invest in us. And so typically the push that I see is that you'll see these ads, or you'll see some quasi scientific data that shows the comparisons of producing animal-based proteins compared to, say, like lab protein. So what they'll do is they'll put land. Oh, well, it requires this many more square feet, like a 10-fold or even 100-fold difference land to produce this stuff. Okay. Water. Oh, it's 1,000-fold difference to produce animal-based proteins, water compared to lab. And then they'll go down and they'll just make these really wonderful statements about how you're saving the world. And then it will say, hey, it costs $1.50 to produce this animal protein, but it costs $12.50 to produce this lab protein. So if you give us the investment, we're going to get this stuff up to scale. We're going to bring that number down, and then we're going to take the whole animal industry out in the process. And so I often see it that way. But concurrently, let's not be naive. Tyson has come up with a blended product. All the, if somebody will buy it, they're going to make it, no doubt, right? And so let's not be naive to think that we're not going to see more of these plant-based alternatives in mixed in meat or sold. But to say that by switching from an animal-based protein to a lab protein or to a plant-based protein is going to have a big impact environmentally, I just don't buy it.
Yeah, and this is the thing, this is all theoretical based on these companies. They have these theoretical inputs and outputs. And you make a very good point about photosynthesis not being able to top that. And I look at this, the cell cultured meat, and I think the average person thinks, you put some cells in a vat and they magically grow without any input, and they turn into this giant, hamburger that they've made. And, they've got to feed those things something. And so where's that stuff going to come from? I mean, what does that look like? And what does the efficiency look like on that?
Oh yeah. So how do you start a lab culture for lab-based meat? Fetal bovine serum.
Yeah, bovine serum.
Where did the fetal bovine serum come from? Came from a packing floor. They don't talk about that.
Yeah, I mean that they some people think that they're going to be able to get away from that, get away from the fetal bovine serum, and for people who don't know, it's basically they take a pregnant cow, slaughter, take the fetus, do thoracentesis, stick a big needle in its heart with no anesthetic, draw the serum out, feed it to the cells, and then they got to keep feeding. They got to keep getting more and more cow fetuses to make that stuff grow. And then I'm like, where's the protein come from? What's going to come from a big monocrop, right? I mean, that's soybeans and peas and that type of stuff.
And it takes a lot of energy to do it, and I think honestly, carbon's the wrong metric. I've talked with more people. I think really just like the natural energy footprint of the food should be the driver, right? Because I mean, we can capture a lot of solar energy through the way that we grow our pastures, our crops, and other things, and trying to circumvent that. The energy then is going to be coming from natural gas. That's the deal. At the end of the day, you can't get something for nothing. And it takes energy to make food, and it takes energy to make energy. And so and generally, as we learned, right, like, and every time we convert energy from one form to another, we lose a significant part of it, right? And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of we can do in our food system. But what's happening is we're getting in these bullshit, esoteric, nebular, red herring conversations that aren't going to help farmers and it aren't going to make us healthier. And that's what we need to be focused on.
Where do you see, I mean, because you obviously have an interest in some of this regenerative type stuff. Is there a financial benefit for most ranchers doing this? I hear from guys that are successful at it all the time. Yes, like it took me 2, 3 years, 4 years to start seeing a profit. I got out of the input, high input herbicide, pesticide, giant machinery. I'm not using that anymore. Is that practical for a significant percentage of our ranchers in U.S. and around the world?
Without question. So profit equals income minus expense. Okay. Probably folks in DC hadn't figured that one out very well, but P equals I minus E, right? So if you want to look at the bottom line for a beef producer, 80 to 90% of the variation that explains profit is on the expense side and not the income side. So if I want to look at the variability that explains profitability in the beef business, almost all of it is related to expenses. Those expenses are supplemental feed, they're fertilizers, they're other inputs, right? They're the pickup truck, they're the, I don't picture Frank Fleming cruising around a little Prius down there in LA. He's probably got a little bigger rig to get to town in, And I don't, we got Subarus all over this place. So I'm not trying to make it that way, but the point then is that what's happening then is that if you can, so I'll take my data from MSU. We'll be sciencey. All right. I quit 10 years ago. I quit my fertilizers. I quit cutting hay. I quit herbicides. We just went cold turkey because that's what universities should do. And I looked at the amount of beef we were producing. We sold everything off the cow. We had the cows were big genetics. All the offspring were going in a feedlot. Sold all those cows. I bought more moderate cows from a 5L ranch, Red Angus, Montana. #1 Red Angus producer in the nation. Very good genetics for grass-fed. So I did all this at one time. I measured soil. I measured income. I measured everything. So guess what? When I quit fertilizing, when I quit spraying stuff, when I quit harvesting stuff, and I use the animal as long as I can in the year to harvest those forages, I've got tons of neighbors in the dairy industry. I buy cheap hay, bring it onto my place. What are the outcomes? Well, within a 10-year period of time, okay, actually it was more like 5 or 6, we improved our utilization per acre of forage by 30 to 40% in a very productive area. We're more like New Zealand, not like California, okay? So the point is I got rid of everything and the grasses responded better, all right? Everything started growing more. We were growing more grass and not less by letting the biology of the soil start doing this. So I got rid of all those expenses, okay? I found cows that were more efficient of converting grass to red meat, right? I did that. I grazed longer in the season. And all those things combined, we dramatically cut our input costs, right? And I produced more grass by letting nature do it versus me trying to use technology. And so we've proven that here. And there are thousands of ranchers in this country and globally that have proven the same thing.
Yeah, and yet you see, I mean, I can't remember. I think it was there's a pretty big study or position document called Grazed and Confused. I don't know if you've read that. I can't remember who put that out, but
God, yeah, I get it about once a year. It was good people, right? And again, I think they're always good people that in my opinion, Grazed and Confused really didn't conceptually understand the auspices of holistic management. But at the end of the day, to your point, a non-refereed white paper that came out being very critical of how we manage livestock. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, basically just for the people that haven't looked at that, this is an article that was cited as world experts say that you can't do grass finished in sustainable way and feed people. I mean, it basically said it's impossible. And, I've seen the pushback from you guys saying, hey, look, they're looking at assumptions that aren't valid anymore. They're looking at, probably grass finish in a way that's done without proper management. And I think that's a huge difference there. And so I've had Alan Williams on and, I don't know if you confirm what he says, but he says, if we can convert something like 40% of 40-50% of our ranches to a regenerative style grazing, that we can offset significant amounts of carbon emissions throughout the United States through soil sequestration, even to make the point, of the bold point, that we could offset all of our greenhouse gas emissions with that. Is that something your research backs up?
Yeah, I was the author on that paper, and we've sequestered roughly around 3 tons per hectare per year. I'm waiting on our newest results. Is it going to probably slow down? Yeah, at some point. It won't go away. That saturation deal I don't buy, but ultimately, we at our place have measured soils intensively for 10 years. I've actually gotten to the point where I'm not a great soil scientist, but I'm getting there. I'm kind of a generalist anyway. And we've without question seen high amounts of carbon uptake through our grazing. Now, it's not rocket science, right? We get in, again, these huge arguments. It's about inputs back into the soil, and it's nitrogen that drives it. So if you're in a very arid, like brittle environment where you run a cow on 100 acres, well, you're maybe not even you might be picking it up, but the space and time variation of trying to accurately assess soil carbon in that kind of landscape, it's pretty underwhelming. In very productive landscapes like I'm at, where we get 35, 40 inches of year of rain, we can pick up large amounts, especially up front, and we've done it. I think that without question, there are great opportunities to put it back. I hate the fact that we are, carbon is always this metric of like, and it's like, we need to emphasize biodiversity. We need to emphasize profitability, water. I mean, especially water. Like, look what's happened in California. You can really push and push and push for carbon, and then we have these really bad combination things line up, and how much carbon has gone up in the atmosphere on the West Coast this year, right? And but point being is we can do it. I want to value profitability, producer well-being, and I think the things that really drive that are also intrinsically related to carbon and energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look, and this is, I think, one of the problems with defining a metric and an outcome. We see this in medicine. What at all costs we're going to drive your cholesterol down, and I'm not going to belabor that too much, but we saw, and this is what I guess maybe in the 1970s they looked at greenhouse gas emissions, and this is where largely some of the CAFO operations came out of, because yes, they showed they could reduce methane emissions yes, they use less land, yes, they use less water. Relative to what they were doing before. But then there's also the unintended consequences of now we've got problems with, inputs and that type of stuff, and antibiotic usage and, resistant organisms.
Unintended consequences, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing. And I like the idea of, maybe it's as simple as, let's walk across this field and see what it looks like this year versus what it looked like 3 years ago. And, it's pretty obvious to all of us. We see, land is doing well. And I think it's almost a visceral, hey, look, it looks better. It's probably clear that things are doing better, rather than just kind of, I like the idea. But so, everybody's focused on carbon, the Paris Accord is focused on carbon emissions. And you're saying, we got to, maybe it's overall energy inputs and outputs. Obviously here in the US, this political stuff is going crazy. Who knows what's going to happen? I think it's going to be weeks, if not more, and there's going to be a lot of back and forth on this stuff. Do you see any, and I try not to get too political on this stuff, because I think there's good guys on either side that are going to support improving the environment. What are your thoughts on what can we do? Is there anything we can do legislatively that's going to sort of benefit us from how we produce our food?
Yeah, that's a great one. And my theory is that generally I find private industry is more aggressive. And typically I see government making decisions when they have to. But that doesn't mean we can't accomplish a lot with policy. And, but I just want to lay that out there. I think the private market, when given the right messages, can really adapt. But, what I do see, what I think we can do, like, I think of it more simply, right? Like in the Farm Bill, I mean, up until this last go, planting a cover crop could be detrimental to a farmer's bottom line because they considered a cover crop something green and growing. And if they have something green and growing, they can't claim a crop disaster prior, right? Like, oh, well, something happened and we had this, we had enough rain at the right time. I can't make a corn crop. We won't talk about if maybe they shouldn't have grown corn there in the first place. That's another story. But then if I did even try to get something green growing, you come out, oh, well, you got something here. You can't get your crop insurance. So we're making small changes. You're seeing small changes happen that are more amenable to agriculture. So I think that we monetize the wrong things, and it's all about yield. And so it doesn't matter. The density of it doesn't matter. It's just if it weighs or not. And man, that just becomes an extractive way of doing things. And so ultimately, back to your questions, I think we need to start more aptly thinking about policies that potentially suggest for greater biodiversity, for greater soil, right? Like we do these things. I do get worried about policy because some people, there are a lot of people that their idea of policy is getting rid of cows. And that's where I get frightened, right? Is that it's just kind of I would invite any politician to come out to my farm. I'll walk you through it. We'll look at it. And we've got some really good ones in Michigan on both sides of the aisle. But I think then we've got to slowly try to understand that farmers and ranchers are standing on many of the solutions that can solve the issues we have with climate, with food production, right? And we need to find out ways that most aptly monetize those farmers for the right decisions versus less. Maybe it isn't like we're going to pay you to do something, but hey, the more things you grow, the less taxes you pay, right? Like we're going to say, hey, let's encourage biodiversity by cutting your taxes, not by paying you to do something. There's a lot of ways that we can think about doing it.
And one of the things that, you see this sort of plant-based movement, this vegan movement, a lot of people become activists and they strap themselves to assembly line, kind of crazy stuff. And I just wonder if, it would make more sense for these people that involve themselves in activism to maybe come out to these ranches where you guys work and put their energy there. And I don't know how open and accepting most ranchers would be to have some young 20-year-old kid who wants to save the world come out and work on the ranch and learn stuff. I mean, is there a viable way to sort of channel some of that energy into saying, hey, there are more ways to skin a cat here, and the solution is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's improve the situation. So I just wonder if there's a network of people where young people can go and spend time volunteering, becoming an activist for what a lot of the folks that are trying to improve their agriculture system.
Yeah, that's no doubt. Like, I mean, I think of like we have like I work really closely with our Grassfed exchange, and colleague Russ Concert came up with this concept of having scholars, young people that we pay for them from all over the world to come to our conference. And that's it. We introduce some of these people that some may have a lot of experience, others don't. And we kind of foster intentional collisions and say, hey, well, there's opportunities to come work at Ranch A, B, and C. Go out to Elzinga's or go out to Fleming's. The Quivira Coalition is also doing that. And what's really cool is it's we used to call it, like, it was this group of impact investors called the Herd Scholars, of which a few are in California, some are on the East Coast, but like, I don't want to miss anybody, but there are fostering these collisions, and I typically see it through these kind of more organic, meaning like self-organizing groups that have started these conferences that are inviting young people out and getting them there. And what happens is a few things. Like the broader agriculture has become highly defensive. And so often they have pounded their hand on the desk or table saying, I'm right, right? And they've been just really programmed to be defensive. And therefore it kind of, I think, gives off the wrong emoji. And hopefully then what can happen is over time, we need those folks to kind of slowly think about their actions, and we need to foster an environment that promotes changing of farming practices. But concurrently, to your point, I mean, look, we're fixing to lose the entire primary generation of our farmers, right? They're retiring. They're moving on. Okay. They're raising hell in Florida. And so we've got to be thinking about, what does that next generation come from? What do they look like? And how do we raise them up to be thinking more holistically about how they produce food?
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing. I'm just, like I said, I think one of the problems I think for, is, we've got our communication right now is so much through technology and social media. And, you've got this older generation that just doesn't have time for it. And it's tough to get your opinions out there when you've got these 20-year-old kids saying, look, your people are torturing animals and that's the way it is. And you don't have a strong counter message because you just don't have utilization of the message machine. And I think that's why I like doing this and at least getting some of this stuff out there, and hopefully more people will adopt, hey, I mean, for good or bad, this is the way communication is done these days, and it's social media and it's all those things. And unfortunately, there's some issues with these tech companies perhaps bending the message to the way they want. And, Silicon Valley they're investing a lot of money in this alternative meat supply. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars, if not approaching billions of dollars in this stuff. Do you see, like you talk about corporations now, I've seen some promise out of, I think places like, I know General Mills you mentioned, but I think like A&W, McDonald's, some big corporations are actually starting to take up the sustainability mantle or running that flag up there. And so do you see more of that happening? Oh,
definitely. Because the same people that you might potentially be trying to pick a Twitter fight with, or not pick, but, defend yourself on Twitter, are the same people that are starting to get hired in these companies. So there is a new generation of, I would say from 20s to 40s that are really trying to move the needle with respect to these things. And McDonald's has funded some of our work on looking at enteric methane. They funded, some projects, the adaptive multi-paddock, Williams was on there. Peter Bick led that. Great leader in this space. And when these companies are making these target emission drops, there's only a few places you can really make a lot of progress, right? So absolutely, these are all coming to bear. So it's going to continue to change, I think, a lot. I don't know, I know that one way I think people want to solve it is through, ecosystem service markets. I work with a lot of those people, great people. I think something's going to happen. I'm not sure. I want to make sure those types of markets, meaning the big industries, are wanting to potentially see some of these happen. And that might be a good thing. I'm still up in the air on how accurately we can measure these things at time and scale. But they're definitely big industries moving that direction, right? And General Mills sponsored a paper. I thank God Almighty we got it accepted this week. But a paper going in Frontiers on the white oak pastures work that we've been working on for three years, right? And General Mills helped with that. People care. And that's the thing that really pisses me off is that, well, if you work for McDonald's, you're the devil. Or, if you work for this small little organic deal, you're like a crazy hippie. Or, I just don't go for any of that, because people are people. We all are very complex. You shouldn't try to judge people or define people based on who they work for, right? I mean, but we tend to get in those arguments, and it really isn't very productive. And a lot of it happens online. I got rid of all my stuff. I got so tired of trying to talk to just people that would not accept Alan Savory's for what he is, a brilliant man, maybe flawed. He's been an asshole a lot for over the years, but he's the most brilliant human being I've ever met, right? And I got so tired of dealing with these people that were so triggered because Alan said grazing livestock can be a really good component, right? And I gave up, man. My wife will tell you, it about put me over the edge. And I gave it up. And the last time I don't miss any of the social media stuff, but I'm probably going to be a dinosaur really quick too.
Hey, let me one last thing I want to ask about, because I know a lot of people are looking at this, and Frank Mitloner's doing it at UC Davis, but they're incorporating different feed additives, whether it's red algae from Australia, to cut down on the enteric, production that's coming from these cow belches.
Yeah.
Do you see that being a viable, two questions, do you see that being a viable option, something that people will pursue? Is it something we need to do? And then the other thing is that going to have a significant impact on the quality of the meat? Is it going to have a deleterious effect on the meat quality, you think?
I've never done any of that work. I think the logic is there. I know that UC Davis has been doing it. Dr. Karyab is working with, or Mas Karyab, working with algae and dairy and other things. I'm for anything, right, that can potentially lower the footprint. Again, to me, I think methane and ruminants is kind of, again, a bit of a red herring, perhaps. But ultimately, they can. So, it really irritates me that you look at ionophores. Ionophores alter the propionate to acetate, which are volatile fatty acids. I don't want to get too much chemical, but we can feed at a very small amount something to a grazing animal that can improve weight gain, considerably lower methane, but it's shaped like an antibiotic. So it's considered an antibiotic. So if you're in a natural or organic or any kind of a program, you can't use it. But it's a really proven, and I'm not trying to, wave the flag for anybody's industry, but the point is, it's a pretty straightforward technology that works. But it's not natural anymore or whatever. And I think so. My theory is that anything that can lower the footprint and do well and be profitable, I'm all for it. And I'm not going to get too picky. And everybody's in a different environmental context with a different production scale. And so everybody's got to find what works for them. Is there potential for some of those to concurrently improve nutrient density? I would assume so, because you are what you eat. And so if there are opportunities out there, I think we should be supportive. At the end of the day, I still go back to the fact that, cows, beef animals, dairy animals, grazing green grasses, powered by the sun, is probably the best solution.
Yeah, I mean, they're self-replicating, solar-powered, protein machines. That's protein and fat.
Upscale stuff we can eat.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's something. Jason, it's been wonderful. I appreciate it. It's been an hour and it's flown by.
Already?
I think we could probably maybe do a second round one of these days.
Yeah, but, cool.
What do you have any more research up on the horizon that you're doing? And then tell us where folks, I know you said you just kind of divesting yourself from social media, but if somebody wanted to learn more about what you do, or even, maybe they want to help the system, where can they go?
The first question is that we're continually having, research come out. Super excited about finally the fact that, like with our White Oak Pastures paper, again, it is accepted. I don't feel sheepish in talking about it. That, look, we take a diverse regenerative type of farming system and show that it can dramatically lower greenhouse gases, dramatically, okay, compared to how we traditionally grow protein. The challenge is it takes more land. It takes twice the land to produce the same amount of food. So there's balances in all of it, right? But we do show that these regenerative systems, we basically, through a chrono sequence of soil, show about a 2.29 metric ton of carbon sequestration per hectare per year. So I'm super excited. That's going to hopefully be out publicly in the next few weeks, I'm hoping, maybe month. That's something out there. And we're working on that. We're also doing some follow-up on supplementation's effect on fatty acid profiles. I don't really like, I thrive in anonymity. And so I don't really have any good ways. MSU, is the best way to probably find what we're doing through our Lake City research, our Facebook page, some things like that. But that's normally, I need to get better at that. Maybe I should get some of these young kids working for me more on it.
There you go. Hey, I just one thing, and just because you mentioned this, when you talk about tons of carbon per hectare per year, that doesn't mean anything to me, because I don't know if that's a lot or a little. Is there a way to put that into context? Like, what would a normal be thing? What is it? How much?
Yeah.
Can we say how many cars would that be? Like, I don't know if that's a way to do that.
For every acre and a half at my farm, we offset the emissions of one medium-sized car annually. How's that sound?
Okay. All right. So
and a hectare, my wife's like, tell them what a hectare is. It's about 2.5 acres.
So you're every acre and a half, you knocked off one car off the road. How many
Yeah.
and how many acres? I mean, so how many acres are available in the U.S. to do that on, and how many cars do we have? So what
Yeah, my God, dude, I don't know, but we've got there is hundreds of millions of acres in the U.S. that have largely been managed pretty conventionally. It's important, again, that I hate to extrapolate, because each environmental location is going to be really different in terms of what the opportunities are. We need to come up with some better papers to do that. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that we can improve through management. And I look forward to the next 20 years of my life trying to get it figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I think because if you can put it into terms, because this message is complicated and nuanced, and it takes a half hour to debunk some of the other garbages out there. So if you can say, hey, we got 300 million acres in the U.S. and we got 60 million cars, and we can offset all of them with that would be, I think that would help get the message out. I don't know if that's
smart. That's smart. And I think, honestly, let's just first worry about offsetting our own footprint, like the production of it. Right.
Yeah.
And move forward. But yeah, I agree. That's kind of my like nerd factor that I do. Like, every day's Groundhog Day here at the Rowntree house. I go to my computer and work all day and nerd out by myself, kind of a gig. So I need to get more apt in how to convey this stuff. I agree.
Yeah, I think that would help the messaging. I think it's what we need, because it's, the other sort of team, if you will, is relying on a very visceral, emotion-based message, which takes all of about 3 seconds to convey, and then you've got to spend an hour debunking that. And I think if we could,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
So I just want to be sure we have this on tape, that there's a Longhorn telling an Aggie to dumb it down. I'm joking.
There you go. Hey, man, sometimes you got to do it. But anyway,
dude, I'm playing, bro.
Hey, I'll tell you, one of the things, and this is something I regret, because I know in Texas, if you have a Texas A&M sticker on your car, you're allowed to use the handicap spots.
Lord, there you go. There you go. I won't even go there. It's been so long. I don't even have a dog in the fight anymore.
All right, man. That's good. All right, Jason. It's good talking to you. All right, guys. Everybody have a good day. I'm going to go crush me a steak, and you guys, we'll talk to you later. Thanks.
All right. Adios.
Bye-bye.